So, continuing on with the Progressive Era, we're going to look at business and economic reform today. So, a reminder as to what the Progressive Era was, it was basically a group of people, typically those who were in the middle class, that wanted to use the government to solve the problems that they had been seeing in the world. On Monday, we went over the suffrage movement and women gaining the right to vote. Today, we're going to look how business and economic reforms ended up taking hold during the Progressive Era. So, the first thing that we're going to look at is early business reform, specifically Frederick Taylor's scientific management. So, Frederick Taylor ends up coming out with this book, Scientific Management. And in it, he was basically just trying to help companies, specifically like the factory system, be more productive. When the Industrial Revolution takes place in the mid and late 1800s, this was very new for everybody. Typically, people had been at home, they did more sort of family owned businesses. But by the time the Industrial Revolution takes place, you have people moving to the city and they're working in factories and places like that. Frederick Taylor sort of saw that there was a need to increase productivity. And by increasing productivity, we mean that workers either do stuff more efficiently or they work harder in order to get more product for the business. So, Frederick Taylor's suggestions were things like make sure that people are doing what it is that they're good at. So, if we just use me, for example, I can teach history. If you asked me to go over and teach an Algebra 2 class, there's absolutely no way that I would be able to do that. Math is not my thing. And Frederick Taylor would also agree, don't put Miss Toller teaching math, keep her in teaching history because that's something that she's able to do. Frederick Taylor also kind of helps develop that management system. So, like if you work at a job, let's say you work at Albertsons and you are a courtesy clerk and you have a problem with either a customer or another employee, you don't call corporate, you go to your manager. And then if problems persist, your manager then goes to your store director, the main guy in charge. The same thing happens with me. If I'm having an issue with something in my class, I don't call the superintendent of the district. I would go to either my assistant principal or my department chair. And if they couldn't help me, I then go to the principal. And if the principal couldn't help me, then I would go to the superintendent. But there's basically like this little order of succession of what you do when there's a problem. And Frederick Taylor was really sort of the one who sort of created that method. So it was keep people being efficient by putting them in jobs that they're good at and then creating that management system where you have people who basically walk around and regulate employees to make sure they're doing what it is that they're supposed to do. You're also going to have the Interstate Commerce Commission that gets created, and basically it was regulating railroads specifically, and it was to ensure fair rates, to basically make sure that you weren't going to be overcharged or charged a ridiculous amount of money. However, the Interstate Commerce Commission no longer exists. You're also going to have the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act that get created, and these were created in hopes of preventing monopolies. So again, a monopoly is when a company has a single control over the market. So going back to an example I gave you a few weeks ago, if Angel Soft were the only toilet paper company around and they wanted to charge $20 for a single roll of toilet paper, they absolutely could. And the reason being is that Angel Soft is the only toilet paper company around, so they have a monopoly on the market. If other companies like Charmin Ultra and Costco's brand and Target's brand were to suddenly come out with toilet paper that they decide to charge for $5 a roll, Angel Soft would be forced to lower those prices in order to compete. So monopolies, again, bad for consumers, but they are good for businesses. So the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act were created to make sure that consumers were protected from monopolies. And then, of course, you're going to have labor unions that are going to emerge as well. Unions typically fight for workers' rights. So better pay, better health care, better hours, overtime pay, vacation pay, things like that. Of course, you're also going to have an emphasis on child labor reform, and hopefully many of you got this, especially last year in world history when you were looking at the Industrial Revolution. So by 1900, you have close to 2 million children under the age of 16 who were working in factories. And if you read last year in world history, a lot of the conditions that the kids were facing were really quite awful. You had a lot of kids who were talking about how they'd be working in the factories. Many of them couldn't afford shoes, so they would get like nails caught in their toes or in the foots in general. Because they had tiny hands, they were really used for like needling and small things in the machines. But because of how dangerous it wasn't uncommon for a kid to possibly lose their hand while they were working on the machine. I also kind of read some stories where the owners would like literally take the kids' hands like to the machine themselves. That way they couldn't move and they would continue to work. So kids really had a god awful job. And John Spargo is going to write this book called The Bitter Cry of the Children, in which he really highlights the conditions that kids are facing, not just in the factories, but also in the mines as well. You also have a lot of kids that are going to be sent to work in the mines. And if you know anything about the mining industry, it's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. A lot of miners develop what's called black lung because they breathe in so much crap while they're down in the mines. Most of them are dead by the time they hit 60 because they're just in such poor health condition. But you had a lot of kids that weren't just working in the factories; they were also working in the mines as well. So what's going to end up being developed is the Children's Bureau, and it tackled a variety of issues that affected children, including labor, health, as well as safety. So like now, if you want a job, you have to be 16 with the work permit. There's only certain hours that you can work during the week. I don't know if this has changed because I know the curfew has changed, but when I was your guys' age, the curfew was 10 p.m. I know now it's 11 p.m., but companies were not allowed to work you past 10 p.m. because of the curfew. That might have changed now just because I know the curfew has changed in the last couple of years, but typically during the week, a company can only work you 4 hours a week because you are still a student in a high school. Something else that's going to be created is compulsory education, and it was created as an alternative of occupation for children instead of work. Really, what this means is that the K through 12 system was created, which offers free and public education to all kids in the United States. So, all of you that go to school, which is everybody who's listening to this, right, you are guaranteed free public education. Now, some of you might be like, oh, it'd be so much better to work. As somebody who has worked minimum wage jobs and has had two of them at one time and has worked close to 60 hours a week just to get by, working 60 hours a week is not very fun, and sometimes it is better to be in school. But the idea with creating the K through 12 system was to give hope or possibilities to kids that they weren't going to have to work in the mining industry, or they weren't going to have to work in the factories, that they would be able to maybe go to college or get a degree where they can get a better paying job and hopefully earn more money. You're also going to have a lot of health and safety reforms that are going to be created as a result of the progressives. So on March 25th of 1911, a fire is going to break out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. And as a result, 146 female garment workers are going to die from the fire or jump to their death. Here was the problem with the factory. There were no windows, really. And if there were, there basically wasn't a balcony or a safety ladder for them to be able to escape. So a lot of the women that were in this fire, it was on like the 7th or 8th floor, which if you don't have a fire escape, if you jump, you know that essentially you're going to die. Something else that this factory was doing is they were locked inside the actual building itself. So it wasn't like they were able to break out. They were literally stuck. So while they're basically stuck in this room, they have two options. It's either you're going to burn to death or you're going to jump to your death. And so a lot of the women ended up making the choices to die, whereas others ended up being caught up in the fire and dying inside. In the movie Iron Jawed Angels, at the beginning, you see the woman, talking about like, oh, votes don't pay the bills and stuff like that. And you see Hilary Swank's character, Alice Paul, mention that there was a factory fire last month. Where's your fire escape? The fire that she's referring to is this Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, where because there was no way to exit the room because they were locked inside and because there was no fire escape on the outside of the building, 146 women are going to be killed as a result. And you'll see some of the pictures here. So see that these are some of the remnants of the factory fire. You can see just a ton of damage was done. So if you look especially at this picture on the right, again, you can see that they're using the water to put out the fire, but again, no fire escape is nearby. And this one on the left, it ended up crumbling completely. These were some of the women that had jumped to their death. And these were some of the women that ended up burning alive. So some of the bodies were so grotesque that they were covered up, and a brief description was written on the outside of the coffin to maybe be like, hey, this could have been so-and-so. But when a body's really burnt like that, it's really hard to identify who it is. It's not like today where you can pull DNA or get dental records, or, if someone had surgery, you could pull up the plate number, from when they got their hip replaced or whatever it may be. Back then, it would have been like, hey, if you knew somebody was working there and they didn't come home that night, they were likely killed in that fire. So, what reforms are going to result? Well, there's going to be regulation on hours as well as conditions in factories. Back in those days, it wasn't uncommon for people to work 12, 14, or even 16-hour days. Today, that is not the case. You can work 8 hours. Anything after 8 hours is automatically considered overtime, so you would make time and a half. I think minimum wage right now is $12, but I could be wrong. So if you're making at a minimum wage job and you're making $12 an hour, and let's say your work needs you to, instead of working 8 hours, they need you to work 10 for those last 2 hours, you would then make $18 an hour rather than 12 because you are working overtime. Workers' compensation is also going to be created. Workers' compensation exists for when you are injured on the job. Before, if you were that little kid who got their hand cut off, or you were somebody who got injured on the job, that was it. You were sent home, you weren't able to work, and you weren't able to get any money to help out with your family. Now that is not the case. If you are hurt while working on the job, you are guaranteed workers' compensation. So when I worked at Albertsons years ago, a friend of mine was grabbing a pallet. He ended up dropping it on his foot and it split open his toe. As a result, he wasn't able to work, so he goes on workers' compensation, which continued to pay him until he healed. Something else that's going to happen is you're going to have fire and safety equipment that are going to be placed all throughout businesses as well as schools. So if you've noticed, anytime you come into a classroom at Temescal Canyon, that there is a fire extinguisher somewhere. You also have the ability to exit the classroom. So I'm in the 550 buildings. Even though I can lock the doors from the outside so nobody can come in, there is a safety bar on that door itself. So let's say an earthquake were to happen and we need to all get out of the room, we can easily hit that safety bar to get out. So again, you wouldn't be able to get in, but you would be able to get out. All businesses pretty much have a little sign above the door that says this door must remain unlocked during business hours because, again, if a fire were to break out in the store or some type of natural disaster happens, people have to have a way to escape. You're also going to have zoning laws that get passed to organize city businesses and residential needs. So basically, if a business wants to make any type of change to the building or the structure, they have to get it approved. Even your parents have to do this within your own home. If they decide to put like a pool in their backyard, it's something that they have to get approved by the city. Or if they're planning on doing work to their backyard, that's part of those zoning laws. Skip this one. And then, of course, the Gospel of Wealth is also going to be created as well. Andrew Carnegie, who's really one of the more sort of famous entrepreneurs from this time, he had made his name in steel. He had made about $400 million in his lifetime. And he had decided that because he was so rich, it only seemed fair that he would give away his wealth. So the $400 million that he made during his lifetime, $350 million of it, he ended up donating to charity. Usually a lot of business people will do this. They'll donate their money to a lot of universities and places like that, and then in exchange, a building or a library or whatever it may be gets named after them. So if anyone's into music, if you've heard of Carnegie Hall, it's a very famous place where people go to play music. Carnegie Hall is named after Andrew Carnegie. So because of this business and economic reform, and because you had so many businesses that were making so much money, there was a big push from some people that, hey, because I am so rich, I should donate my wealth because I don't necessarily need $400 million, but there's other people that could use it instead.